Hope that's okay. Thanks, everyone. And I'm kicking us off today. Okay. And first, take the opportunity to welcome all of you to this discussion today of the results of our 2021 Immigrant Survey. My name is Tara Bedard. I know almost everybody here. I'm the Executive Director with the Immigration Partnership. I work with Dan, who is on the call here, and Alejandra and Pauline on our staff team. We are kind of the backbone staff team support to the Immigration Partnership, in case any of you are not that engaged in our work. I'd like to start today's meeting with a territorial acknowledgement. So I'd just like to acknowledge that the land on which we live, work, and play is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. This land within the Haldeman Tract is promised to the Six Nations and takes in 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. I acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land, and I recognize and appreciate their historic connection to this place. Their contributions have been incredible in shaping and strengthening this community in the past and today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, and I would like to, and I think our collective commitment to making truth and reconciliation real in our community. And when I think about truth and reconciliation in the context of our work and why we're here today, for me, Canada's colonial history really shows what happens when specific groups are othered. And so in my view, it is important that we think about our past as we address the challenges of today and look to the future, ideally a future where everyone belongs and everyone thrives. With that said, welcome everyone. Very glad that you could all join us today. Dan has prepared an amazing presentation, and I'm going to ask him to start sharing screen if that's okay. We have a very rough high-level agenda to share with you that I'll just quickly give you an overview of. Dan, can you go to the next slide, please? So the reason that we're here today is all around the earlier this year, together with the incredible support of the more than 60 different organizational partners that we have across Waterloo region, and with huge thanks to the more than 1,500 immigrants in Waterloo region who took the time to respond to the survey and share with us their perspectives of living and working in this region. So today we're going to share just a little bit about the history of this work and the context of it. Dan will talk to you about our survey methodology. We're going to share some of the findings of the data with you, introduce some of what we see in terms of the implications when we start to look at all of the data that is in front of us, and then have a chance to talk with all of you in terms of what is standing out. Do you have any questions? I'd like to hear your thoughts on implications for what you're hearing and seeing in the data, and anything that we at the Immigration Partnership, organizations in this community, or you in the work that you're doing in the community could or should or will be taking from this work. Dan, can you go to the next slide, please? And we weren't sure who was going to be here today, so we just put in a slide. I think pretty much everybody knows about the Immigration Partnership, but as I said, we are a collaborative partnership initiative. And we are working within the context currently of a 5-year community action plan that puts out a strategy for building immigration in Waterloo region. The vision for our strategy that we have set as a community is that immigrants reach their full potential and contribute to creating and sustaining a thriving. Next slide, please, Dan. A big part of the work that we do through the Immigration Partnership is really that understanding what is happening in our community and Since the beginning of the Immigration Partnership, there's been a really strong focus and demand by the organizations and individuals who are involved in the partnership that we be evidence. We use research and data to guide our decisions in terms of the collaborative work that we are doing, advocacy that we are doing on behalf of the community, and that we are looking at what we know about this community in terms of trends and experiences from the perspective of immigrants to drive as a community what we're doing together. And so this work and the survey in particular is important for many reasons. And I will just highlight a few of them here. First of all, we all live here together, and we are working towards a community that thrives and everyone belongs, each of us in our different ways, in our different worlds. And we all know that everyone experiences life in our community differently. And we are trying to bring focus through our work through the Immigration Partnership to one particular but very diverse group of residents in Waterloo region, anyone who has immigrated at one point or another into our community. Secondly, immigrants currently account for a very significant portion of the population in Waterloo region, and we know they factor heavily in future population growth and change in the region. They currently make up a quarter of the region's total population, probably somewhere between almost 120 and 150,000 people. We're really curious to see what the numbers are based on the news, but even more so, at least a third of our region's population growth currently comes from immigration. In 2017, 2018, 32% of population growth was as a result of immigration. And we anticipate that that trend will continue or possibly increase. When we look at provincial projections, Waterloo region is expected to reach over 900,000 people by 2051. That's 300,000 new people in the community, many of whom will be immigrants. When we look at immigrant arrivals data on the table that Dan is showing right now, new immigrant arrivals have been growing significantly in the last little while, and we expect that they will continue to do so as the government federally continues to commit to higher annual immigration targets. Not only are our monthly new permanent resident arrivals in Waterloo region continuing to increase, but we have seen incredible growth in the number of temporary residents in the region, international students, temporary foreign workers. For example, we have seen increases from less than 3,000 permanent residents per year coming to Waterloo region in 2015 to what we expect to be around 8,000 this year in 2021. So that's a big jump in terms of new permanent residents. And when we last looked at temporary residents, that was really, really shocking. The population of international students and temporary workers had grown from, I think it was under about 5,000 or 12 to close to around 30,000 in 2018. So a really big jump in the number of temporary residents, and many of those are looking to stay permanently in Waterloo region or somewhere else in Canada. The third reason relates to what we're seeing in terms of what immigration growth in the community means, together with other changes in terms of diversity in our region, and what that means in terms of welcome experiences of racism and other things. New immigration is tending to come from a much more diverse range of countries of origin, people who speak many different languages, very different racial backgrounds, very different faith connections, and much more. Different groups, as we know, have different experiences of living here in this region, and some have many more challenges than others, specifically when we're thinking about discrimination, racism, and more. So through immigration and more, it's changing a lot. And this survey is our way of looking at what does that mean? What does this mean for the community? And fourth, another really important focus of the work that we do and within this survey all relates to understanding immigrants in the context of our labor market, and particularly with growing labor challenges and the shortages experienced by employers in our region. We know that immigrants arrive with a range of skills, experiences, and educational backgrounds that they can challenge to gain meaningful employment that provides sufficient income for themselves and their families. At the same time, many employers face growing difficulties attracting and retaining people for a range of roles in our local economy. We're looking at where are the gaps and how we can help to bring people together in an impactful way to resolve the employment challenges experienced by both the newcomers and the employers in our community. Dan, can you go to the next slide, please? And so that brings us to the last slide that I'm going to, our survey of immigrants for 2021. This is a biannual survey that we do, and it has grown significantly over time. We went from initially hearing from about 200 immigrants to about 1,500. And it's a tool for us as a community to hear from newcomers on a whole range of experiences, perspectives, looking at immigrant contributions, where are they struggling and where are they doing well, inclusive of, looking at the diverse demographic profile of the immigrant population. When we're talking about immigrants, it's a very diverse group, and who's doing well, who's doing not so well, how can we be really targeted in the work that we're doing to build a better community for everyone. So I will stop now, turn off my microphone, and hand it over to Dan.
So I don't want to spend, I'm thinking that given that there's a small number of us, that I will go fairly quickly through first the methodology and then some time for questions, and then greater time for questions. Because there's a small number of us, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about each of these pieces, and then we can come back to them when, according to the questions that you have. So pardon me if we go quickly, but we can always come back if you have any questions about that. So in terms of the methodology, just make a note that on this website, there is a bunch of information related to the survey. There's has a whole lot of information about the methodology, the findings, and quotes from immigrants themselves as relevant to each of the different sections. But it'll also hold individual disaggregated briefs that we want to do for different subgroups. What does the data tell us? What are immigrants saying who are from different geographies, who are different immigration categories, who just pulling out different pieces, maybe about housing or about employment, but doing kind of a zeroing in and focusing on those. So those will be up on that web. Check back on that. So the methodology, the survey, as you're probably well aware, included quite a few different topics. It's meant to be something that gives us information on a broad range and then can spur on conversation around, so what does that mean? And we can dig deeper. But it explores a number of areas that you can see here, but it also explores something stronger. Too often we just focus on the problems and the challenges and how things are hard, but also it's important to balance that with the many ways immigrants make our community richer, and to document that. And so that's another thing that this survey does. You can see the full survey tool or questionnaire here, and the link is also available in the summary document on the website. So when you do a survey of any population, often the average different variations within that. And so we want to disaggregate the data to see how experiences differed for at least these 26 specific groups. We did a quick analysis of the survey data at the beginning to pull out what are the groups that might be more dramatically different than the average. And so we identified those, and then we pulled in a few others that partners had said, this is pay attention to, we should analyze by that, we should be aware of that. And so we came up with this group of 26 specific groups and wanted to look at how things were different for these groups, in addition to the average. So we heard in June of this year from over 1,500 immigrants, and the main survey was in English, and it was online because the survey was done during the third wave of the pandemic. We didn't have the in-person methods that we normally had with going to grocery stores and the multicultural festival and ethnic celebrations and that sort of thing. But we did have alternate ways that people could fill out the survey if they weren't able to online. But about 3/4 filled it out in English, and then 1/4 in the 10 different languages that we into. So statistically speaking, it's not a representative sample like something that Stats Canada might do with a random selection of phone calls, but we worked really hard to make it a very, very diverse and targeted promotion strategy. So we would reach as many people as possible and make the results as representative as possible. And so all through the data collection, we were checking who had responded and from the representation of those groups in the general population, so that when there was a group that wasn't as represented, we could do targeted promotion to fill that out. And I think we checked across about 40 different groups to make sure they were as representative as possible. And I think all but maybe 8 met those targets that we had set to be as representative as possible. The survey captures all major categories of immigration, permanent and temporary residents. About half of the participants only in Canada for 5 years or less. But we wanted to have some people who had come more recently and experienced more recent changes, as well as people who could look back over many years to say, this is what my experience was with the benefit of time, and to get both of those perspectives. And the survey respondents represented all 3 cities within Waterloo region, as well as the rural townships. It represented different population groups, white individuals, Black, South Asian, American, Arab, and other racial groups. And we use the StatsCan categories that they use in the census for comparison. Just checking, you can see this red pointer, right?
Yeah, we see it, Dan.
Excellent. So then I can kind of direct you to what I'm talking about. And just to go back to that, so 70% is sometimes referred to as racialized or non-white. 84% of participants had a first language other than English, and these are some of the first languages that were represented in rough order of size. 80 plus different first languages, and 70% of participants whose first language wasn't English spoke English well or very well. So certainly was a common point of connection, and yet 9% spoke English only poorly or not at all. Again, speaking to that importance of translating the survey. And then just a few more pieces. The survey was a bit more skewed towards female respondents versus male. And it was difficult to like a small number of people who didn't fit into either of those categories. 5% identified as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and 9% with a disability or chronic disease. Any questions before I jump into the findings around the methodology? I don't want to spend too much time on the methodology so that we get into the meat of it, but anything that I can clear up at this point.
I have a question, Dan.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So you said 9% of the respondents had lived for this time, and I'm just wondering, like, how does, so this was online, and so a lot of lower language clients might not have access to the technology. So compared to last, or like 2 years ago when the survey was done, was that a higher percentage?
I will have to double check that. I don't recall that it was dramatically different.
Okay.
But Pauline is making note of the questions, and I will look into that, and I will get back to you about that. I think I was a bit
Sorry, could you
surprised
repeat your question?
Brittany, do you want to repeat that, or?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So Dan had said that 9% of the people who filled out the survey had like lower levels of English. So I was just wondering, because the last time before this, when we did it, it was in person before the pandemic. So I was just wondering if there was a larger percent last time with lower levels of English that filled it out.
Okay.
Oh, Tara's saying it was 12%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, just because like from the multicultural center, like it can be a little bit harder because just access to technology or that kind of thing, being online, people being isolated with the lower levels of English makes it harder.
And certainly people with low English levels were an area that a group of people that came up regularly, and we'll go into more frequently in some of these questions. Any other questions on the methodology before I jump into the findings? Okay. Well, certainly, if you think of something, then we can come back to it in the Q&A at the end. So, some key themes in the findings, and we'll dig into each of these and look at the data behind them. So, immigrants positively contribute to life in Waterloo region in many ways, and more the quantitative questions as well as the qualitative comments all the way through. Some really inspiring stories of ways that they contribute, from small things like giving blood on occasion, donating blood, or to things that reach a really wide number of people, like owning a business and employing many individuals, the whole range, and really inspiring. Number 2, key concerns: continuing employment, affordable housing, and connectedness or belonging. These are the top issues that we heard in 2017, 2019, and again in 2021. Increased isolation experiences during the pandemic. This is something that we wondered about, and we asked a couple of questions specifically about, and certainly was something that increased since the pre-pandemic survey. Welcoming and inclusion is an important area for focus. We heard that from who had settled and experienced welcoming, and from those who said there wasn't that welcoming, there was discrimination, kind of the negative side of that. And then immigrants are diverse, and various groups are having more difficulties at this time. Some are doing really well, and some are struggling more. And it's this became very clear that we need to continue to pull these things apart to make the data really. So the contributions of immigrants. Immigrants contribute many ways to the vitality and life of the community, from 2/3 helping their neighbors when they need it, 1/3 of respondents providing unpaid help for family members, another third donating to local charities, about a third contributing through their job, and a whole host of other ways that they contribute. Some of the comments that people shared, volunteering with the YMCA computer literacy program, helping seed, or starting up a charitable organization whose purpose is to invest in women and families as we empower them to engage in activities that will advance education, relieve poverty, promote health, etc. And that was from someone who came just 2 years ago, or someone who came many years ago when they were 20, and they now own several businesses, and they say they count their blessings every day, being able to, or someone who donates blood regularly, because I feel a sense of accomplishment when I'm able to support others. And so I encourage you to read the summary report, which includes a lot of other comments and stories about how immigrants make this community richer, more caring, and diverse. When we asked immigrants what their key challenges were over the last year, similar to past years, the key things were finding work or social connections, finding affordable housing, and being socially isolated. This last one, you can see here what wasn't asked in 2017 and 2019. And so this was a new option in 2021 this year. But you can see where some of these increased or decreased. So the number of people said finding work was a significant challenge for them, decreased, and that might be some of the financial supports during the pandemic. But on the other hand, the number of people who said making friends or social connections was a key challenge for them increased, in all likelihood impacted by the pandemic and social distancing. I'll flip then to, we asked them, what about the things that are solutions that would respond to some of those key challenges? So not surprisingly, more affordable housing options was the most frequently mentioned solution, or thing that we should collectively work on. Programs for immigrants to find work, that employment continues to be a key concern for people. More opportunities to help improve English skills, and educating employers on the value and ways of hiring, retaining, and promoting immigrants. Or actions to reduce racism and discrimination. It's interesting to see that there is a reflection of the work across the immigration partnership in these different solutions, especially these top solutions that immigrants are saying these are the most important things. And those are certainly the areas that the immigration partnership has been and continues to work on collectively. In terms of the most significant supports, we asked what helped you most in the past year. So having family support was the most frequent helpful thing or support for immigrants. And you can see that that was something that went up in the last 2 years, from pre-pandemic to in the middle of the pandemic. That family support, those people who you live with, your social bubble, making friends, on the other hand, went down. Still number 2, but less important than the previous year, probably speaking to a certain extent to that social distancing and being disconnected from those circles of friends. And belonging to a religious group, in terms of religious affiliation, about 3/4 of respondents were part of a faith community, were a member of a faith community. And 38% of participants were a member of a Christian faith community, of 10% Muslim, 10% other, and the remaining 1/4 were not a member of a faith community. Then in terms of service use, we asked immigrants what services they used, looking at this broad range of different types of services. And this is a percentage of the immigrants that used these different services. So ranging from a high of health services of 90% had used health services down to only 40% having used some sort of small business entrepreneurial supports services. And then here in the blue is the rating of those services by these individuals. So whether it was in blue, excellent, very good, or good, or in maroon, whether it's poor or acceptable. And so certainly there's a variation. 95% of respondents rated at least one service positively, and 58% rated at least one service. So they had things that they worked well for them and things that didn't work well. We'll dig into some of the specifics of these in the next couple slides. So we asked how they access services, especially during the pandemic when things were pivoting very quickly. 32% access services in line. A lot of services had to be in person. Some, doctors sort of thing. But 62% access services virtually online. And then 45% virtually in other means, phone, possibly fax, or other ways. Survey participants were asked why they might not have accessed services virtually. What are those barriers? And so 9% said the services weren't available virtually. 4% said services weren't available virtually in their language. And I think it certainly speaks to early on in the pandemic that translating interpretation is really critical when key information is only shared in English. And that can be a huge barrier for people. Another 2% didn't have the tools to access services. Might be internet access, high speed, laptop, phone, etc. And 2% might not seem like a lot of people, but when we multiply that by 100,000 immigrants or across 8,000 immigrants who came in the last year even, all of a sudden that ends up who didn't have the tools to access services, or 6% who were not comfortable accessing virtual services, whether that's because of age and familiarity with these services, or it's just not their thing, and that lack of comfort becomes a huge barrier. Then looking at employment, education, and income. As we found in many surveys, nationally as well as locally, survey participants were more highly educated when compared to the overall population in Waterloo region. So 71% of participants had completed a degree or above, whereas in the general population, only about 23% have completed a bachelor's degree or above. But despite being highly educated, about half of immigrants who responded to the survey indicated their job was not at the same level as their skills or experience. And so there's a really disconnect between the skills that they bring and the jobs that they're able to 63% were employed, the majority were employed, with 16% being unemployed and seeking work. And then 5% of participants shared that they're the business owners with their business contributing to the regional economy. And that, in many cases, having quite a number of jobs spinning off from that. When we look at the number of people who are in jobs commensurate with their skills or experience, so 49% of all survey jobs that are at the same level as their skills or experience. These are some of the groups, though, that were less likely to be in a job that is at the same level as their skills or experience. So at the lowest end, you've got recent government-assisted refugees, recent refugee claimants, individuals with low income, recent refugees, international students, etc., that are in jobs that are not at the same level as their skills or experience. And so there's that huge disconnect. When we look at employment services, and we asked immigrants, of those that used employment services in the last year, how helpful were they in finding employment? So 68% said that they found the employment services quite useful in helping them find employment, but 33% did not. And a lot of the comments were around that employment services might be useful, but not for people like them. So that might be as an international student, that most centers cooperate or support refugee people money here opposite of students. And so that was their perspective, that it was geared towards people who are refugees. Or in this last comment, employment services only help people with permanent resident status, as opposed to international students, temporary workers, that sort of thing. Or some in the second comment saying employment services are very limited for professionals, people who come with significant credentials or experience or education, and it's difficult for them to enter the industry, and the employment services aren't really geared towards them. Then employment leads to income, and we asked immigrants, is your income sufficient for the needs of you and your family? And so it wasn't a specific number to reflect, is it sufficient for you and your family? And 55% of all respondents, all immigrants, said they have sufficient income. But there's some groups that were less likely to say that their income was sufficient. So particularly recent refugee claimants, recent refugees, people who are unemployed, recent government-assisted refugees, low English, low education, etc. And a number of these groups struggling, some of them, income was definitely not sufficient. And an impact of not having sufficient income is housing. And so 74%, so 3/4 of immigrants that responded to the survey said that their housing was affordable and suitable for them and their family. And but there were some groups, like these groups here, that were less likely to be in housing that is affordable and suitable. So low-income individuals who responded to the survey, recent refugees who responded to the survey, those with a poor settlement experience, Black individuals, refugee claimants, etc. So when we asked them about how useful housing services were in helping them to find housing, it was a lower percentage than when we asked them about employment services or language learning services. Only 61% found housing services useful in helping them to find housing. But most of the comments were around the housing environment. There just isn't enough housing at something they can afford. But comments were also around the role of landlords. Landlords who might not be understanding of the struggles to come to Canada with no credit history. Housing for newcomers can be very challenging with no credit history. We had to bring a co-signer in order to get our rental application completed after it had been rejected by more than 15 applications. So the comments weren't so much about the housing services aren't targeted enough, they're not helpful, the staff aren't friendly. It wasn't so much about that as much as there just isn't the housing available, and that some landlords don't treat us well or understand the struggles. Then we also asked about community welcoming and integration, settling in Waterloo region. And so 93% of surveyed immigrants chose to come to Waterloo region. So some immigrants, the community was chosen for them. Government-assisted refugees, privately sponsored refugees, and similar to other surveys, because of family or friends that live in Waterloo region, for a job, or for post-secondary institutions. And they wanted to stay in Waterloo region for reasons that were similar. With the addition of this piece of community feeling, sense of welcoming, or feeling of home, they put down roots here, and this becomes their home, and they want to stay. And they can't imagine, in some cases, moving anywhere else because this is their home. In the interest of time, I'll jump to the next slide. There's lots more stories in the summary report. We asked about life satisfaction. So how satisfied are you with your life right now? And we asked them on a scale from 0, very dissatisfied, all the way up to 10, very satisfied. And so the people that rated it between 8 and 10 with these percentages, we said, assumed are quite satisfied with their life right now. So half of immigrants are quite satisfied with their 40% rate it as between 5 and 7 on that 10-point scale. So they're somewhat satisfied. And then 11% were dissatisfied with their life right now. When we peel that back in terms of what groups are feeling differently, so the average for all survey respondents was 76%, 3/4 of survey respondents, sorry, this is settlement experience. So we asked them about their overall settlement experience. Did you have a positive settlement experience? And so 3/4 said, yes, I had a positive settlement experience, settlement and integrating in Waterloo region. But these groups were more likely to say they had a positive settlement experience. Recent refugee claimants, recent refugees, white, rural individuals, and recent government-assisted refugees. But some groups were less likely to say they had a good settlement experience. Isolated individuals, Cambridge residents, people with a disability, unemployed, low income, etc. And just a note, with some of these groups, there was a smaller sample size. And so there might be more variation just due to sampling, that maybe we got, it was enough to be above our cutoff of at least 20 respondents to do some sort of analysis by that group, but it might not have been a really large number beyond that. So some of these, like Francophone, there is a smaller number. So just we need to interpret those with caution. Sense of belonging. Some immigrant groups had a very strong sense of belonging. Across all immigrant respondents, 71% said, I have a strong sense of belonging in Waterloo region. Groups that were more likely to have that strong sense of belonging were recent refugees, recent refugee claimants, and low education. And the groups that were less likely to have that strong sense of belonging are individuals with a poor settlement experience, temporary work permit holders, people who are isolated, low English, international students, etc. Isolation was one of those pieces where we saw that there was a significant difference between when we asked the question in 2017, 2019, where it was fairly steady at about 60%, and then during the pandemic jumped to 76%. When we look at which groups feel that isolation to some degree over the past year, so the average was 76%, and some of these groups were more likely to say, I felt isolated to some degree in the past year. Might be a great amount or just a little bit, but I felt isolated in the past year. So individuals with a poor settlement experience, francophones, temporary permit holders, people with a disability, youth, etc. With their experiences of welcoming. So how welcoming is Waterloo Region to immigrants? On a scale of 0, not at all welcoming to immigrants, to 10, Waterloo Region is very welcoming to immigrants. And so those that rated it between 8 and 10 was about 50% of respondents said that Waterloo Region is quite welcoming. Then there was those that rated it between 5 and 7, and so 40% of respondents said Waterloo Region is somewhat welcoming. And then 11% that welcoming to immigrants. When we break that down for which groups, again, we have 50% of all survey respondents that said Waterloo Region is quite welcoming to immigrants. But then some groups were more likely to say, yeah, Waterloo Region is quite welcoming. Recent government-assisted refugees, people with low education, recent refugee claimants, youth, recent immigrants, etc. Or some groups were less likely to say that Waterloo Region is welcoming. Individuals with a poor settlement experience, only 10% said Waterloo Region is quite welcoming. LGBTQ plus individuals, isolated individuals, temporary work permit holders, etc. Then looking at discrimination, we found that 24% of survey respondents, all immigrants, had experienced discrimination at some point in the past year. And this is roughly similar to what it was the last 2 years. So that hasn't gone up or down dramatically. But there's some groups that had experienced that much more so, more likely to experience discrimination. So individuals with a poor settlement experience, people with a disability, low income, rural, Cambridge residents, isolated individuals, etc. And it probably is worthwhile to point out that this isn't necessarily discrimination based on race or it could be due to a disability or due to their gender or LGBTQ affiliation or their religion. So, but these are the groups that were more likely to experience discrimination. So things like, I'm working at a childcare center. There are many cases that the parents of the children just ignore me, asking for Canadians on their kids. When we ask them where that discrimination happens, most often it happened at work or when applying for a job or promotion, 50%, and roughly similar to where it was the last few years. Secondarily, in a store, bank, or restaurant. Next, at school or university. And this one went up, though this might be because we had a larger number of interns that responded to the survey in 2021. But this shows a few of the areas where they reported discrimination happening. One of the things that we looked at in terms of discrimination is that early in the data collection period on June 6th, there was a hate incident in London where a Muslim family was killed as they went for a walk. And we looked at Muslim respondents that filled out the survey before and after that incident in London to find out what impact an event like that has on people's welcoming. And we found that Muslim respondents after the London hate incident were less likely to say that the Waterloo region community was quite welcoming to immigrants, 50% versus 55%. So not a large difference, but there was a difference that they were less likely to say that Waterloo region is welcoming to immigrants after that incident in London. And they're more likely to have experienced discrimination in the past year after, for the respondents after that incident. So something like this just opens up a lot more questions and certainly is an area for further exploration. So the last slide that I have is kind of looking back over all those indicators. What are those groups with greater challenges? The groups that came up most having a more difficult time looking across multiple indicators, multiple analysis methods. So some groups came up most frequently: isolated individuals, those with less ability to communicate in English, and low income. And to a lesser extent, all of these individuals. The one that came up quite a bit was this people who had a poor settlement or integration experience. And it's not whether the poor settlement integration experience causes increased vulnerability, or increased vulnerability and the aspects of that lead to a poor settlement integration experience. But certainly there was that connection between the two. And certainly it's not an exhaustive list. Some of the populations didn't have a large enough sample size to analyze. So this just hits a few of those things that came. So I'm going to turn it over now to Tara to talk about survey implications and just some ideas around what this data means, and then we'll open up for Q&A.
Thanks, Dan. Can you go to the next slide, please?
I didn't get the final list.
Any changes to what you had sent. So let me go back and find that. Sorry, I didn't know that it was. Okay, give me 1 second, please, people.
I can take any questions that people have and start that off. Any specific questions that people have?
How do you define a poor settlement / integration? Kind of broad,
Absolutely.
right?
And so we deliberately kept that broad, and it was self-reported. So we asked them, the question was, let me just find the exact wording of that question. Right. Okay. No, sorry, I don't have that. Oh, how would you describe your overall experience of moving to and integrating in Waterloo region? And they could answer excellent, good, Excellent. Sorry, excellent, very good, good, or poor. Or sorry, excellent, good, neutral, or not very good. So those four. So not very good were those that said I had not a very good experience of settling in Waterloo region.
Thank you.
And I'll put into the chat. So we started to brainstorm some of what we think we see in terms of implications when we look at all of the breadth of the data that is available. And I'll just say, like Dan has done, like the report of this survey with 1,500 respondents and the ability to look at so many specific groups and their different experiences. There's a lot of data. The report's quite long. And you know, Dan has really pulled out, you know, some of, you know, the highlights, but there's a lot more. And so, you know, as we look at all of that and the information that Dan has presented today, we started to brainstorm some of what we see as implications in terms of things we should be doing or exploring locally in terms of responding to what we are seeing in terms of the challenges that, you know, various immigrant groups across the region are experiencing. And I'm not going to read them for you because I put them into the chat. I'm more interested in having a conversation that stood out in this data for you. What do you think are the implications of this? What does it mean for the work that we do together as the Immigration Partnership? What does it mean for you in your own organizations and for the work that you are doing, or anything else that you think we can and should be taking into consideration as we go forward? Gosh, sorry, I'm getting bombed on my phone and I don't know how to turn it off right now. I don't know if that ping keeps coming through on my microphone, but I'm apologizing now. So note that Gabrielle has mentioned a number of times in the chat, and it really stood out for me, how often the Francophone population in this region comes up as feeling more challenged across so many dimensions of the things that we looked at in this survey. So that jumped at me too, for sure. Is there anything else that folks would like to share? Is there direction that you feel this gives to you, to us, to others that we should be considering? Things specifically you think that we should be doing or pressing for? This is our first chance to really look at the data together with there was a presentation at the Belong Steering Group, but I don't know how much time there was for, you know, and this is going to inform the work that we are doing over the next couple of years until we do the survey again. So I think, you know, it's important for us to think about now in the next couple of years, at least in terms of what we're doing in Waterloo region to better support the immigrant population in the region. We can also, maybe Pauline, we can stop the recording. I don't think we need this anymore. We just really needed the presentation.